Hello and welcome to another episode. Today I am trying out a slightly different. Let me get this fixed up here. There we go. I'm trying out a slightly different position. You can tell me if you like it or not. I know the other position is a pure white background. It's kind of hard to tell, but I figure I'd switch things up and see how they look. So, today we are going to talk about um, just kind of the general story of Fallout, the general history of the Fallout universe. So that's kind of our subject today. And with that, I guess we'll jump right in. I got my notes as always, but following the end of World War II in 1945, there was an event known as the divergence between our world and the Fallout universe. Kind of gives it that difference from Mars. Up to that point, our history had pretty much been the same. There are a few minor differences, but for the most part, it was pretty much the same history. Now, the actual point of the diversion is often debated. Many people like to claim it's the Zetans, with their kidnapping all the way back to the age of the samurai. I believe it's Toshiro Kago, samurai you meet on Mothership Zeta. But I have to disagree, because in the Fallout universe, there was no full acknowledgement or recognition of the Zetan society, or confirmation that there were indeed aliens in that universe. Now, not to get into conspiratorial grounds here, but there's been no confirmation on this Earth either. So actually, it pretty much holds the same true. So if there is such a thing as aliens that have visited this planet, we have no confirmation, no verification of this happening. And thus, it's pretty much the same history. So I don't see the Zetans being the difference. Because even as immense as we know our own galaxy is, let alone the universe, we've had no confirmation. And as far as I know, in the Fallout universe, there was no confirmation, no verification that the Zetans existed, even though playing in the game, we know they did. But again, not to try to get conspiratorial, there's no verified contact, no acknowledgement or verification of such contact in our world. So I have to rule the Zetans out. And as I said, there's other minor differences, but they're not enough to completely change the flow of history. Like you had in the 1930s Vicky and Vance, where they didn't exist in our world, but they existed in the Fallout world. You also had the 1930s Vim Incorporated being founded. Or even as far back as 1918, Sunset Sarsaparilla started production. So there are differences, but they aren't the kind of differences that vastly change the universe either. The one I have to say that is different from our own, that started making a difference, that is clear and visible from the Fallout universe, is the transistor. The invention, well, the transistor started being uh, invented early, but the modern transistor that we know was invented and patented in 1947, allowing for the miniaturization of a lot of our modern devices. Um, in the Fallout universe, it wasn't until 2023 that the transistor was invented. So there's a lot of difference between the worlds. Let me get a drink here. I'm a bit thirsty, a bit tired too. I've been up so late. And again, uh, before I go any further, I do want to apologize for the lateness of the video. I usually get them up earlier. Um, but yeah, I have to point to the invention of the transistor in 1947, or in the Fallout universe, the lack of an invention until 2023. This is the difference between our universes. Clearly. Um, so, the transistor is a large difference between things, because in our world, with the invention of the transistor, you slowly started seeing things shrink. Much like the Fallout universe, we had the giant supercomputers that ate up whole rooms. But we slowly shrunk them down and had these uber thin um, home computers and starting to store a lot more memory. In the Fallout universe, they didn't get the transistor until 2023, which is 54 years. Yeah, 54 years before the bombs fell. So, think 54 years after 1947, let's put you at about 2000 some. That's, that's the difference. So, that's why a lot of devices look so different in the Fallout universe. It's got that very retro feel because there's no transistor. Um, let's see. What else? Other things to talk about. Oh, yeah. The hippie culture. The hippie culture in our world, we're pretty much feel the 1960s into the 70s is our era of the hippie. You know, the someone who was like, peace, man, loved everybody, harmony, you know, no war. Fallout proudly sets its existence on a 1940s, 50s, and 60s aesthetic. So the era of the hippies being that this era of um, Cold War mentality existed, The era of the hippies lasted longer as well, um, even up to the days of the bomb. We know that the Great War, there was a lot of protests before. You can look on the bunkers at Hidden Valley in Fallout New Vegas and see that there was a lot of hippiness, I guess would be the best way to say it. But there was a lot of protest against government violence and war and, you know, other such things. Now, um, but yeah, the bunkers in Hidden Valley is definitely a good example of this. Another thing we can talk about is the geopolitical climate that kind of affected everything. In our world, the era of nuclear fear began post World War II between the Soviet Union, the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic, I think it's, yeah, United Soviet Socialist Republic. So the USSR and the US. That fear still exists in the Fallout world. We don't have the dissipation that we have. In our world, the USSR was dissolved in 91. In the Fallout universe, they're not dissolved, but they're not near as powerful as they were. So, we have the USSR, but we also have, in our world, we have China. In the Fallout universe, the post-Mao communism era of China in the 1970s in our world, Richard Nixon was the first president to travel to China in, maybe the first president ever, but it's to open relations with China in 1972. That may not seem to have happened in the Fallout universe. And so China is still a very non-free market economy, very closed down society. And after 1991, they kind of pick up the baton that the USSR has laid down. So you have China as the primary enemy of the Fallout series. We do know there are still the same political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, because both sides are mentioned. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about the atmosphere. The atmosphere of the Fallout games, as I mentioned before, it's very set in the aesthetic, the feeling, and the design of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. There's probably even a little bit of 30s in there. But it's mostly the three decades, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. You have still the feeling of communism, the Red Scare, the McCarthy hearings, the Cuban Missile Crisis. You still have that kind of atmosphere. that kind of feeling in the Fallout world. And you can tell with the music how it kind of matches. The design of the buildings are very similar. The modern dress style is very similar. So all this with the flair of the rocket and the atomic age. Think the Jetsons and Rosie the maid, this robot house servant. Um, that's kind of the way the Fallout universe is with the Mr. Handys. So you have Rosie, you have atomic powered vehicles, because in this universe, you do have a depletion of the oil wells. In the Middle East, um, instead of going for other sources of power to power themselves, they go for other sources of power to make weapons. The European Commonwealth, which is equivalent to today's European Union, falls apart as it has war first with the Middle East and then with itself over resources. And of course, there's a great battle between China and the US over the state of Alaska. Um, Alaska is one of the last bastions of oil. You know, even though we've got atomic power, we've already used so much uranium because there's so much demand of growth and this ability, and the world's not able to sustain it. It just doesn't work. So, um, yeah, oil is running out, uranium is running out, and you have the two to deal with, even though they're disappearing. But eventually, China invades Alaska, and this kind of sets up our story because the U.S. annexes Canada to get a straight shot into Alaska, to move its troops, to move its weapons, which is, of course, a direct invasion of our friends to the north. But they go into Alaska with the newly made suits of power armor. And with the T-51 power armor, they push back the Chinese and even invade China to force them to come home and defend their territory. So with that, we take Alaska back. And we think the resource wars are over. We think we've done it, we own Alaska, we've won. Months later, in October of 2077, in the early morning, there is a 2-hour volley of nuclear missiles that decimate the world. So October of 2077, the Great War happens. It's just 2 hours long, but it completely destroys civilizations, decimates landscapes, buries economies. And this is the basis that we kind of start the Fallout universe in. Now, the next thing we know in this generalized setting of the Fallout universe is 25 years later. Which is soon to be the next Fallout game, Fallout 76. But it's 25 years after the Great War, after everybody's entered the vaults. And in Fallout 76 in West Virginia, Vault 76 opens. Which is interesting because in the Fallout universe, there is an actual bunker under the Greenbrier Hotel in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. That was for congressional and presidential use in emergencies. So there was an actual bunker, a government bunker to protect the president and Congress during an emergency. I don't believe it is still verified as a bunker for them, but it's still there. And I believe you can take tours of it. Not certain. Don't come back and go, no, you can't. I'm not certain of it, but I believe you can. But yeah, Vault 76. Unlike the other majority of the vaults by Vault Tech, Vault 76 was a control vault. It's only one of 17. Because as any good scientist knows, to experiment, you need control experiments. So, and Vault 76 was indeed one of these control vaults. Now, that was in 2102, 25 years after the bombs dropped. The next part we see in the Fallout line takes place in the original Fallout game. And that takes place in the year 2161. 86 years following the Great War. So, the first time we see anybody, it's 25 years. The second time, it's 86. So, that's another 61 years that have passed. And then it takes place in Southern California. Not too far from Mariposa, California. That's where your family is at in Vault 13. I can't remember the name of the actual mountain it was said to be under. Shoot, what was the name of that mountain? I'll probably list it in the video, but you're buried under a mountain that is Vault number 13. And you travel as far south as Los Angeles. Let's see, which is Los Angeles is the what was Los Angeles? See, Bakersfield is the necropolis. Los Angeles, I'm wanting to say it's called, yeah, the Boneyard, I believe is the actual name. Regardless, you do go just a little south of Los Angeles. So from Mariposa in the north to just below LA. I don't think you quite reach San Diego, but to just below LA. But anyway, it covers a lot of Southern Cal. 86 years after the Great War. The next game in the series is Fallout 2. Well, I forgot to mention something about Fallout 1. So before we go into Fallout 2, let's talk about Fallout 1. There's one more thing I want to talk about. It brings into the series a lot of the mainstays. In Fallout 1, you are the Vault Dweller because you come from Vault 13. That's your character's nickname. Fallout, Fallout 2, Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4 all have nicknames. And in Fallout 1, you are the Vault Dweller. But it also brings in other mainstays of the series. You find for the first time dog meat. Dog meat becomes a mainstay of the series. In Fallouts 1, 2, 3, and New Vegas, he's kind of a mixed breed, a mutt. In Fallout 4, he's a German Shepherd. So, make of that what you will. What else do we have? Super Mutants for the first time. We come across the Brotherhood of Steel the first time. We come across Death Claws. We come across Rad Scorpions. We come across... What else do we have? Trying to remember. The Gun Runners. The Gun Runners are a staple that you'll see again. And you have the beginnings of what's called the New California Republic. In California, in the Fallout universe, it slowly rebuilds. Sometimes through unscrupulous means, but it rebuilds. A lot of the towns unify under one banner and become known as the New California Republic. But now we're finished with Fallout 1. So, a few years later, and 166 years, well, it's 80 years later, and 166 years from the Great War, in the year 2241, Fallout 2. It takes place more in northern Cal, as well as in Reno, Nevada, or in this case, New Reno, which I kind of chide New Vegas a little bit about, because it's like New Reno, but we're skipping ahead there. So back to Fallout 2. It introduces for the first time the Enclave. The Enclave are the rich and the powerful and members of the government of old world America that hid away on a Poseidon oil platform in the Pacific before the bombs fell. they'd already been holed up for a while and nobody quite knew where they were. But they were hidden on an oil platform in the Pacific Ocean. Well, in the year 2241, they decided they would come back and try to cleanse humanity of the radiated abominations that filled the land and bring it back to natural humanity and put themselves back in control of the US. And in Fallout 1, your villain was the Master, and he ruled a group called the Super Mutants, who were just looking to better humanity, but he could be talked down. Fallout 2 is a little different. It's not as easy to talk down the Enclave because they feel it is their right to take over the US. Now, as I said, Fallout 1, you're the Vault Dweller. Fallout 2, Soul Survivor. Let's see, what was Fallout 2? The Lone Wanderer. I can't remember what Fallout 2's character was named. My apologies for that. I do apologize. But as I said, it takes place in Northern California and Reno, Nevada, which is known as New Reno. But eventually, the Enclave are defeated by what's called the Brotherhood of Steel. So the Brotherhood of Steel are a little more well known. They defeat the Enclave. And so you go, with their help, take down the Enclave. This means the Enclave, though, escapes because they will show up later. But that is the end of Fallout 2. Next one I want to talk about isn't Fallout 3. It's just a mention of Fallout Tactics, Brotherhood of Steel. Tactics is non-canonical, so you don't even need to play it. If you wanted to play the games, the series, you don't really have to play Tactics, Brotherhood of Steel. Because only thing you need to know are certain events. The biggest one is the Brotherhood of Steel did land in Chicago. The rest of it, no. Non-canonical. That's about all you really needed to know. We have no real dates or anything for them, so. Now, we'll go to Fallout 3. So, Fallout 3, you have the Lone Wanderer. He or she is born in Vault, well, I guess born outside a vault, but shortly after birth, after the mother dies, is taken to a vault by the father, and the vault is Vault 101, which is in Washington, D.C., putting it as the first East Coast game in the series. Now, Fallout 1 and 2 were set in California. Fallout 76 is set in West Virginia and is the earliest in the timeline, but is the newest game. It hasn't even come out yet of the making of this video. But Fallout 3 is in the DC area, southern Maryland and northern Virginia, because you do see the ruins of Fairfax, but you go up into Bethesda, Maryland, and so on. But you really run around the ruins of the capital. And it is set in 2277, exactly 200 years since the Great War. So we have 166, we have 86 years, 166 years. Fallout 76 is 25 years. Fallout 3 is 200 years. And as I said, it's in Washington, D.C. And what happens is, as I said, the Lone Wanderer makes it out of Vault 101, which the vault, you would think, is a control vault because there doesn't seem to be very much going on, but it's actually, there is a prolonged experiment being run in 101. So it's not one of the control vaults, even though sometimes it feels like it is, because it's like, there doesn't seem to be much going on here, but there actually is a experiment being run. It's not as insidious as most, but it is an experiment. Now, the Lone Wanderer, our character from Fallout 3, he is fighting the remnants of the Enclave. The Enclave from Fallout 2 escaped. Well, some remnants did, and in their mobile crawler made their way across the country to DC. So in DC, the Lone Wanderer teams with the Eastern chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel, which many people feel have broken the tenets, the rules of the Brotherhood, and thus that's why there's also a group of Brotherhood called the Outcasts, who consider themselves as true Brotherhood members, similar to the West. But once again, you fight, with the help of the Eastern Brotherhood, you fight the Enclave. And purify water for the capital. So the Lone Wanderer helps accomplish this. Now, 4 years later, in the year 2281, we have Fallout New Vegas. So it's 104 years after the bombs drop, and the year 2281, and it's in what's in our world is known as Las Vegas. In and around Las Vegas is where the main story happens, but it also takes place in the Grand Canyons of Arizona. You also go into California with Lonesome Road. So it kind of stretches out a little bit. You'll see some of the staples return, like the Gunrunners and such. One of the DLCs is called Gunrunners Arsenal. And a lot of people will often say this is the best of the games. I have mixed feelings on that. While it did have a short production time, so I can give it some excuses. Um, a lot of it seems to be built around the story of Fallout 2, families that run New Reno, families that run New Vegas. Sound very familiar. And there's also proof that there are characters that have been fleshed out for what was originally meant to be Fallout 3 or Fallout Van Buren, which never got released because before that happened, Interplay had financial troubles and Bethesda ended up buying the intellectual property to Fallout. So, yes, it had a short run. It does have some fun elements to it, but it feels very slapped together. Again, I know it had a short production run, so we can excuse it a little. That's why I have mixed feelings. I don't say it's bad, but it, I feel we could only really judge it if it was given a full time to run. Anyway, your character's name in this game is called the Courier because, well, he's a courier. Um, he's done a lot of traveling um, up into Utah and down into Arizona, and where most of the game takes place in Nevada around Las Vegas. Um, he's even went into California and so on. But you also see characters that are kind of important. In Fallout 1 and 2, you have the build up of the NCR. Well, you see what's become of the NCR in New Vegas. You see what's happened to the pre war millionaire Robert House. Hell, considering inflation, he was probably a billionaire, to be honest with you. But Robert House, we'll just say he's a pre war industrialist. But there's a lot of pretty decent lore stuff you get to discover. And this brings us to Fallout 4, which Fallout 4 was the last one released. And it takes place in the year 2287, 210 years after the Great War. And it takes place in what's called the Commonwealth, which is just the Northeast Commonwealth, considering of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, I believe Connecticut and Vermont, or Connecticut and Rhode Island. But yeah, that Northeast corridor there. Because you do go from Boston, which where most of the game takes place, but you go to places like Concord and Salem and Lexington and Nahant and Natick and so on. But you do go up into Maine in what's known as, in our world as Bar Harbor, but in the game it's called Far Harbor. So it stretches quite a bit, which I guess I didn't mention this pre-war, but they had separated a lot of the states into commonwealths. So you went from 50 states, which you still had states, but they divided them into 13 commonwealths, which is very reminiscent of our revolutionary flag because you had 13 states. So once you had the circle of 13 states, in the Fallout universe, you had the circle of 13 commonwealths with the United States in the middle. It's very, very similar to our world. It's like setting back the clock almost on the way the flag looked. But regardless, Fallout 4, you finally deal with a group called the Institute, which was introduced in Fallout 3. They were making androids or synths, synthetic men. And again, you had some of the same enemies that the world is famous for: death claws and super mutants. But that's Fallout 4 in a nutshell. But as I said, they've already announced Fallout 76, 25 years after the bombs dropped in West Virginia. And they said pretty much the map's going to be the whole of West Virginia. Because you've got it points in the far north all the way down to the south end of West Virginia, and on both sides. Huntsville, Charleston, Logan, all the areas of West Virginia are included in it. So it's I am a bit disappointed it's going to be a multiplayer, well, not multiplayer, but a always online game. But if you do have the possibility to play it by yourself, and you don't need anyone else, at least I can give it a look and see how it looks, how it feels, if there's any good lore or anything like that. If nothing else, it's a good explorer game, survival. I've never been big on the whole MMO type stuff. I just World of Warcraft, anything like that, and not my cup of tea. That's why hopefully this is just their only foray in the Fallout universe into online gaming. We'll have to see. But anyway, that's my video on the general story and history of the Fallout universe. I know it was kind of haphazard, but I tried to put it together as best I could. I couldn't find the energy for some reason to get this video together. I don't know. But anyway, educate thyself. Read, study, learn. Education is so important. I cannot stress it enough. It doesn't mean you have to be an upper class, study in Harvard or Stanford or something like that. Thomas Jefferson knew several languages, was the governor of Virginia, president of the United States, founded the University of Virginia, wrote our Declaration of Independence for the most part. But he was very self-learning. He read, he studied. And that's what I'm saying. Just, you don't have to be a genius, but do yourself a favor and read, study a little bit. But I guess that's all I wanted to say. that's my video. I'll see you all for the next one. You have a good time. Later.